Walter Hallstein. Hallstein was State Secretary for Foreign Affairs under Adenauer. He established the Hallstein Doctrine, which denied diplomatic recognition to those states which recognized East Germany. He had been a member of many leading Nazi organizations, the most significant of which were the National Socialist University Lecturers Association, Dozentenbund, where he qualified as a Nazi leadership officer, enabling him to join the army as an officer in 1942. And he was also a member of the National Socialist League for Protection of the Law, Rechtswahrerbund. Such organizations were not like being a mere member of the Nazi Party. They were central cadres of Nazi rule to which only the most committed would have been admitted. The French President General de Gaulle summed up Hallstein in the following words: "If Dr. Hallstein is a convinced European, it is because he is first and foremost an ambitious German." His ambition during the Nazi period was evident from his intimate involvement in the preservation of Nazi doctrine in universities and the promotion of Nazism in German law. Walter Hallstein became the first president of the EEC Commission in 1958. Paul Henry Spaak. Spaak joined the Belgian national government as foreign minister in 1936 and with Henri de Man developed the Belgian National Socialist Party. One of his notable acts was to refuse assistance to the legal Spanish Republican government then locked in civil war with Franco's fascists. In 1938, Spaak said, "Some people wish to lead us into a policy of solidarity with the democracies against the fascist states. I refuse to stick to such a policy." He concluded, "If Great Britain and France want to help Czechoslovakia by invading Germany through Belgium, they will be treated as invaders." In fact, as the memoirs of Sir Alexander Cadogan, the pre-war British cabinet minister, note, that is exactly how the British forces seeking to defend Belgium against the invading Nazis were treated. Paul Henry Spaak became one of the EU's founding fathers and Secretary General of NATO. Walter Funk. Funk joined the Nazi Party in 1931 and promptly became not only Hitler's personal economic advisor, he was also Reich press chief and minister under Goebbels at the propaganda ministry. And finally he became the Reich's economics minister in 1938. He was the principal liaison man between the Nazi Party and the large industrialists from whom he obtained financial and political support on Hitler's behalf. On the 3rd of December 1938, Funk again advanced the policy of economic extermination by signing a decree which provided that owners of Jewish enterprises could be ordered to sell or liquidate their enterprises. Jews could be ordered to sell and were prohibited from acquiring any real estate. Jews were forced to deposit all stocks, mining shares, bonds, and other securities with specially designated banks, and accounts had to be marked Jewish. Funk was convicted at the Nuremberg trials, and on his release in 1957 he was employed by the Lower Saxony Education Ministry, where he helped to propagate the new European Economic Community to German schools and universities. Although Funk died in 1960, his blueprint for the European Economic Community, drawn up in Berlin in 1941, is virtually indistinguishable from the structure of today's European Union. Hans Josef Globke. By now you will have gathered that most of the Nazi functionaries continued in public life, either as officials or as politicians. Dr. Adenauer, Germany's post-war chancellor, appointed a man called Globke as his state secretary, that is, director of the chancellor's office in Bonn. Globke was the man who had drafted the Nuremberg race laws. It was on Globke's advice that Adenauer made his senior appointments. Globke helped to formulate the emergency legislation that gave Hitler unlimited dictatorial powers in 1933. He had also written a law commentary on the new Reich citizenship law, the Nuremberg race laws, which revoked the citizenship of German Jews. After the war, Globke became director of the Federal Chancellery of West Germany between 1953 and 1963, and as such was one of the closest aides to Federal Chancellor Konrad Adenauer during the plans for and the foundation of the European Union. Globke's key position as a national security advisor to Adenauer and his involvement in anti-communist activities in post-war West Germany made both the West German government and CIA officials wary of exposing his Nazi past. This led, for instance, to the withholding of Adolf Eichmann's alias from the Israeli government and Nazi hunters in the late 1950s, and CIA pressure in 1960 on Life magazine to delete references to Globke from its recently obtained Eichmann memoirs. Alcide de Gasperi. The then journalist, de Gasperi, belonged to that Catholic world of the early days of the Mussolini regime in Italy, with which the Vatican collaborated and maintained close contacts. On the day Mussolini came to power, truckloads of nuns paraded through the streets of Rome, giving the fascist salute, which indicates the attitude of the Vatican in which de Gasperi worked in the 1930s. He was librarian in the Vatican as it became the first state to recognize the Nazi regime and sign its notorious 1934 Concordat with Hitler's Germany. Even during the Nazi occupation, de Gasperi was involved in intrigues against parts of the resistance in order to break up left-wing Catholicism and communist partisans. In 1943, as the war turned against the fascist powers, de Gasperi tried to reinvent himself by founding the Italian Christian Democrat Party. After becoming Italian president in December 1945, de Gasperi pleaded for an end to the criminal prosecution of Mussolini's fascist supporters. In 1952, he was awarded the Nazi-founded Charlemagne Prize, the principal prize for those constructing the European Union. Lady Diana Mosley. Like several aristocratic families and like so many politicians of all parties during the 1930s, Lady Mosley was charmed by fascism. Like Lloyd George, she admired Hitler. Like the liberal Lord Lothian or the socialist Arnold Toynbee, she would certainly have joined a Nazi-based government of Britain. Like Labour's Lord Allen of Hertwood, she would have argued for more African colonies for the German Reich, and like the conservative Sir Samuel Hoare, she would have tried to get rid of Churchill in order to prevent war. Her husband, Sir Oswald Mosley, founded a fascist newspaper called The European, and Lady Diana Mosley, in an interview with the BBC shortly before her death, poured scorn on British Eurosceptics and gave total support to the European Union. Strange that the BBC should so recently interview a lifelong fascist, but perhaps not, when we consider that the BBC kept Churchill off the air for 28 months between 1937 and 1939. Alfred Töpfer, the founder of the Alfred Töpfer Foundation. Töpfer's business interests in the 1940s provided slaked lime for the mass graves in the Lodz ghetto and was involved in the industrial exploitation of occupied France. In the final days of the war, Heinrich Himmler and other leading Nazis gathered at Töpfer's estate, Kalkhorst, a Nazi Reich leadership school. Foreign collaborators with the Nazis were trained to take over governorships of the German Reich in the conquered European states. The founder himself, Töpfer, gave race lectures at Kalkhorst. After the war, Töpfer supported financially Thies Christoffersen, the author of the book The Auschwitz Lie, which denied the extermination of the Jews. The Töpfer Foundation has, since the war, demanded further compensation for their lost Nazi land in the East. The former Nazi possessions comprise several hundred hectares and are the subject of dispositions made by the 1945 Potsdam Agreement. The Töpfer Foundation today has claimed the protection of the European Human Rights Convention. The foundation is today a highly influential political movement. The notorious foundation belongs to an influential group of German ethno-organizations and enjoys direct contact with the German government. A former Minister of State in the German Chancellery, Christina Weiss, Social Democrat, worked under the auspices of the Töpfer Foundation. Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, originally the German Prinz zur Lippe Biesterfeld. Prince Bernhard, who was the co-founder of the Bilderberg Group and one of the original promoters of the European Union, had also been an SS intelligence officer before the war. He had been attached to the Nazi conglomerate IG Farben, which promoted Nazi interests around the world and spied for the German state. IG Farben was so dangerous that it was broken up by the Allies after the war, although many of its successor parts, like BASF, are particularly active in promoting the European Union today. This information about Bernhard and the company he worked for was confirmed by evidence of Max Ilgner, the former head of IG Farben, at his trial at Nuremberg. Despite continuous denials after the war that he had ever been a Nazi Party member, Bernhard was revealed in 1995, thanks to details released from US archives and published in the Netherlands, to have been a member of the Nazi Party from an early date, along with no fewer than 11 members of his family. A copy of his resignation letter is in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. The letter ended, "Heil Hitler," hardly a renunciation of Nazism. According to many, including the British academic Dr. Richard Aldrich, Prince Bernhard's Bilderberg Group was far more important than the European movement in creating the European Union. George McGee, later ambassador to Germany, and who in fact had been my father's tutor at Oxford in the 1930s, confirmed that the Treaty of Rome, which brought the European community into being, was nurtured at Bilderberg meetings. There was an interesting British press cover-up in 2002 when the Daily Telegraph printed an obituary of Prince Claus of the Netherlands on the 8th of October. Mention was made of his father-in-law, Prince Bernhard, having steered clear of the Nazis in the 1930s. I wrote to the obituary letter pointing out Prince Bernhard's long-standing membership of the Nazi Party, his role as an SS intelligence officer attached to IG Farben, etc., etc. The editor referred me to the letters editor, but she refused to publish the letter. After detailed correspondence with Charles Moore of the Daily Telegraph, the paper still refused to publish the facts, i.e. to correct their complete falsehood about Prince Bernhard. The Times, the Daily Mail, and the Evening